After all the bhikkhus had gone, he began to meditate by investigating painful feelings in the same way as he had done before. He started about 9 o'clock in the morning, and went on until 3 o'clock in the afternoon before he was finally successful. The fever died away and he was cured. At the same time, his citta became concentrated and dropped down until it reached its natural level, where it rested for about 2 hours. Finally, at about 6 o'clock in the evening, he left the place where he had been practicing samadhi meditation, feeling a buoyancy of body and heart without anything left to cause him trouble. The fever had completely gone, and his citta had become bright and skilled with wisdom, standing out prominently within himself. He has lived with the Vihara Dhamma ever since then. Locked in spiritual combat. While Ajaan Khao was spending the Vassa at Wat Ba Ban Buang, Sun Mahapon district in Chiang Mai province, he accelerated his efforts in meditation round the clock in every posture and activity, much more so than in his previous Vassa periods. In previous years he had worked very hard as well, but this Vassa he made a special effort beyond what he had done before. He did this by maintaining his effort in the 3 postures of standing, walking, and sitting, without lying down at all. If he slept at all, he did so in the sitting position he used when doing samadhi bhavana, and only then when his body and mind had reached the limit of their ability to go without sleep, which was a time when his mindfulness was at a low ebb. But he refused to let himself give up working so as to lie down and sleep, as he used to when he indulged in the 4th posture of lying down. This was because he clearly saw good results in both samadhi and wisdom. He saw how his heart was more intimately calm and his wisdom was more subtle, penetrating, and proficient than when he was striving in the way he had been practicing before. This gave him encouragement in his effort to maintain the practice and the 3 postures throughout the Vassa without letting his body slouch or assume a posture that would incline towards lying down to sleep. If we use the language of a warrior, he was locked in combat, fighting to win or lose against the kilesas, which like to think only of a comfortable bed and pillow. If they had their way, he would lie down and give in completely, laid out flat at full length like a snake, together with his faith, effort, mindfulness, samadhi, and wisdom. So he determined that those kilesas which drag the bhikkhu down onto the sleeping mat must put up with fasting — bhikkhu meat is tasty for the kilesas — and emaciation for those 3 months of the Vassa period. Then those 5 Dhamma results would get a chance to walk along the path of the Lord Buddha. Practicing in that way, he could sense imminent victory coming from his struggle to fight in all 3 postures, as though he were on the verge of attaining Dhamma in each posture. This added increased enthusiasm to his efforts. His body and heart became light and buoyant due to the various kinds of Dhamma he developed, and his striving became easier as it shifted back and forth, fighting against the kilesas. He was not concerned about the difficulties he faced in fighting the kilesas, which he realized deep in his heart were his enemies. One night, while he was sitting in samadhi bhavana, his citta dropped down into a subtle state of calm and reached the ground of samadhi. It remained there resting for a long time, before withdrawing to the level of upacara samadhi, where a nimitta arose in his citta and he saw the whole earth whirling round like a wheel. The more closely he examined that nimitta, the faster it went round, as though the earth and sky were about to collapse. He felt as though he was floating just above the ground and moving along parallel with the earth, though he wasn't actually walking. In the nimitta, it seemed that his body was floating along the Jankama path he normally used. It floated back and forth many times before it stopped. As soon as it stopped, a light appeared. It seemed to shine down from the sky above and enter into his heart, enabling him to see all the parts within his body quite clearly. He became engrossed in examining the various parts within his body, contemplating them in terms of the basis for the seeing of their loathsomeness, asubhakammatana, and in terms of the 3 characteristics, de lakkana, and the heart was joyful and bright with wisdom, faith, and fearless determination. He discovered many skillful ways and methods for extracting various kinds of kilesas, methods that came to him continually throughout that retreat period. During that vassa he practiced with great energy and enthusiasm, and he understood things very clearly. He experienced none of the somber moods that had troubled him often in the past. Instead, there was a firm resolve in the direction of samadhi, and a clever skillfulness and nimbleness in the direction of mindfulness and wisdom, those two friends of a heart that's striving relentlessly in every posture. At that level, the relationship between mindfulness and wisdom and the citta, which is known as automatic striving, began to appear quite clearly within the citta. Then in all postures the citta kept up a constant effort all the time, excepting only when he slept. There was no longer a need to force mindfulness and wisdom to work like there had been in the past, when he was forced to push them to strive all the time. Previously, if he had not done so, the kilesas would have forced him onto the chopping block, where he would never have been able to stand against them. At earlier stages of his training, his kilesas were much more active, quick, and penetrating than his mindfulness, wisdom, and effort were. We should never pride ourselves on being really clever and skilled when the citta is merely at the level of samadhi or calmness. Although the citta is calm, it is still subject to the seductive temptations of the kilesas, which cause it to become addicted to samadhi, and so lose all interest in investigating with wisdom, which is the way to extract the kilesas and get rid of them from the heart. When the time comes that wisdom moves out to do the work of confronting and fighting the various kilesas, it steadily succeeds in defeating them, rarely finding that it is at a loss, not knowing what to do. We steadily get to know the various alluring enticements of the kilesas, how they appear so harmoniously beautiful and melodious that we become overwhelmed by their lingering appeal. This is why all beings in the world never tire of the various enticements used by the kilesas. This despite the fact that they tempt beings over and over again to love and to hate, and to be so angry or greedy as to cause beings great difficulty, because they have to put up with so much suffering and torment. However many hundreds or thousands or millions of times people do this, still they are never fed up or satiated with it, nor do they see the harmfulness of these enticements at all. If they do see the harm in them, it comes only in a flash when they are experiencing so much suffering and torment that they are truly in a corner with no way out. But almost immediately the allure of the kilesas returns and puts them into a dozing sleep. From then on, the day never comes when anything arouses them enough to see the harmfulness of it. The effort that begins arising at this level of practice is an aggressive kind of effort which fights the kilesas, repeatedly striking at them in many different ways so as to beat up and kill off more and more of them. This kind of effort is in no way at a loss, because it is not lulled into a drunken stupor by the kilesas. It does not look on them as friends and allies and so submit to them in life and death, as was the case before the Dhamma weapons of mindfulness and wisdom were powerful enough to overwhelm them. At the stage that Ajaan Khao had reached, all of his Dhamma weapons were becoming very powerful as they shone forth brightly. They really enjoyed digging up the kilesas, pulling them out, and tearing them to pieces quite ruthlessly. It seems that the firmness of his intention to gain that realm where there is freedom from dukkha steadily gained strength until his striving reached a point of urgency, where the practice was a matter of life and death. Whatever was good would remain. Whatever was bad must be destroyed without any regrets. Birth and death are barbs and thorns which the kilesas always stab into the heart, where they have been the ruling power for countless ages. But they were no longer allowed to have any power to rule, for from then on it was to be the supremely excellent pure Dhamma which alone had power to rule over the heart. Dhamma now ruled the heart where Ajaan Khao previously let the kilesas and the wheel of samsara rule. Instead of Dhamma being driven away and losing out to the kilesas every time, he refused to have the kilesas in his heart any more. After that vassa period, he left that place to go wandering in a Kammatthana way wherever he felt like going. He went to stay near a forest village in Chiang Mai province, where a small hut had been built. In the past, Thutanga Kammatthana bhikkhus had stayed there to work at their practice, but now it was abandoned. It was a very peaceful and quiet place, far away from the village, so he stayed there to develop his practice. One day it started raining heavily in the middle of the day, so he could not go out to walk Jangama. He closed the door, the windows, and the hinged wall, and he sat in Pāwana on the floor of the hut, which was raised well above the ground. While he was sitting doing meditation, it seemed to him that a red-hot, burning pipe had been stuck into his butt. It stopped for a while, and then came up again, so he turned to investigate what it was all about. As soon as his chitta turned to focus on the cause of the hot pipe which was burning him, he realized that the fire was actually the heat of sexual desire appearing from beneath his hut. He knew that it did not come from his own heart. He checked his investigation thoroughly and confirmed that it was in fact the fire of Raga Tanha coming from underneath his hut, for in his own chitta there was absolutely no sign of Raga Tanha at all. The whole time he was engaged in investigating this fire, he never paused to wonder where this fire came from. He was merely reflecting internally, trying to work it out in his heart. How has this blaze of raga been able to cling on to me? I have no fixed attachment to or desire for any man or woman, so my heart is normal. No raga has arisen in it. Every day when he went on Bindabada in the village, he went fully self-controlled, having mindfulness present to watch cautiously every aspect and phase of all those emotional biases which had been enemies of the citta. His heart could never find any aspect of raga tanha that could be an emotional bias. When that fire had calmed down and no longer showed itself, he opened his eyes and rose from his meditation seat, by which time the rain had stopped. Looking behind him, he saw a woman come out from under his hut and walk away. This made him connect the fire that had burnt him with the woman who was just then walking away from under his hut. He realized then that the woman probably had bad thoughts about him, which caused that incident to happen. It's something that he would never have imagined possible. Actually, that woman was quite young, about 25 years old, and most likely unmarried. She was probably out gathering edible plants or firewood, for she was carrying a basket. As she approached his hut, it started to rain heavily, so she quickly took shelter under the hut until the rain stopped, after which she came out and walked away. When Ajaan Khao looked out the window, which was covered by a straw mat with many gaps in it, he could see the woman quite clearly. When telling this story to the bhikkhus and novices on suitable occasions, Ajaan Khao never implied that he was blaming or criticizing the woman at all. He simply used the story of this woman as an example to explain to them about the flow of the citta. Whether focused externally or internally, it is something so subtle that we are normally unaware of it. It is only the process of investigation in the manner of the practice of citta bhavana that enables us to gradually come to know such things. He said that his citta was in a very subtle state at that time, and his mindfulness and wisdom were fast enough to keep up with such happenings. They were not as slow as they used to be when he first started to train himself, so when the raga within his citta suddenly became active, his mindfulness kept up with it, but his wisdom was still not able to cut it off at that stage. Later on, the ability of mindfulness and wisdom that he trained relentlessly reached the point where raga could not stand against it, so it was bound to break up and disperse from the heart in a clearly evident way. He felt at that stage that his striving was progressing very quickly and fearlessly. When performing the regular morning and evening chanting, he did it in a brief form, for his mind was in a hurry to get on to striving with mindfulness and wisdom. He even stopped reciting the various sutta texts, which he previously chanted, in order to put all his effort into developing his mindfulness and wisdom so as to gain freedom as quickly as possible while there was still time. He was afraid that he would die before he got to his desired goal, the Arahata Dhamma.